Summer 2008. Newlyweds and a solo Spanish climber are passing time at the base of Chogori, the second highest peak on Earth, better known as K2. This is one of the deadliest mountains on the planet. For 2 months already, dozens of climbers have been languishing in wait for a chance to ascend. Bad weather has firmly kept them grounded. On the last day of July, nature finally gave the green light, and 22 people began the climb. They stopped for the night at 7,800 meters in the last camp before the summit. 2 days later, world media were screaming about one of the most horrific tragedies in the history of ascents on Chogori. But is it fair to blame the mountain alone for everything? Chogori rightly bears the nickname Killer Mountain. Its height is 8,611 meters above sea level, just a few hundred meters below Everest. But dry numbers don't capture the essence. Many believe that K2, not Everest, is the most difficult mountain in the world to climb. And there are reasons for that. Chogori is located in the Karakoram mountain system in Pakistan. And although there are other high peaks in this region, it's K2 that takes the brunt of the bad weather. Unlike Everest, which stands in the warmer Nepalese zone, K2 is the northernmost of all the 8,000ers. This means that climbers daring to conquer it face lower temperatures, capricious weather, and an extremely short season for ascents. Attempting to climb Chogori is only possible in summer. And even then, success is not guaranteed. From 2009 to 2015, there were only 3 successful ascents. If up to 800 people climb Everest each season, even in the best years, Chogori accepts no more than 120 climbers. How many people in history have been to the summit of Everest? As of 2025, more than 7,260 people, while on Chogori it's about 8 times fewer. But these mountains also keep their grim statistics on the number of deaths. On Everest, over all time, more than 310 deaths have been recorded. That's about 4% of the total number of climbers. But on Chogori, the mortality rate is still significantly higher. According to various estimates, 10 to 13% of climbers die. This means that every 8th and sometimes every 7th does not return from the summit. What makes Chogori so deadly? Imagine how a child draws a mountain, a sharp triangle. K2 looks exactly like that, a pyramid equally steep on all sides. There are several ascent routes, but all of them are nearly vertical walls of rock and ice. The most terrifying section is the Bottleneck. 13 of the latest deaths on K2 occurred right there. It's a narrow couloir with a slope up to 60 degrees. Above their heads hang gigantic overhanging ice blocks, seracs. At any second, an avalanche could happen or the ice could collapse. Therefore, climbers try to pass this zone as quickly as possible. But paradoxically, this is the fastest path to the summit. Alternative routes are even more difficult and take more time, and every minute of delay at this altitude can cost a life. The Bottleneck is located at 8,200 meters within the so-called death zone. At this height, the oxygen level and atmospheric pressure are so low that the human body literally begins to die cell by cell. The death zone starts at 8,000 meters. Despite the danger, the Bottleneck remains the most popular route to the summit. Climbing K2 is considered exceptionally technical. It requires professional mountaineering skills, work on ice, rock, and snow. There are practically no sections where you can just walk. It's all balance, tension, climbing. And so, from camp to camp, from the first to the fourth, right up to the summit itself. By the time climbers reach the 4th camp, they are already completely exhausted. For comparison, on the classic Everest routes, according to experienced climbers, there is practically no rock climbing. It's more like a hike on a snowy slope. There, even if you slip, the safety rope will save you. On K2, a fall almost always means death. And the ascent is only half the journey. The descent from Chogori can be even more terrifying. Exhaustion, dizziness, deteriorating vision, avalanches, serac collapses, worsening weather. All of this multiplies the risk of mistakes, and Chogori does not forgive mistakes. The 2008 season proved this. In July 2008, the weather did not allow for an ascent. International teams patiently waited at the base of the mountain. And then, on July 31st, when the weather began to improve, The first groups immediately headed to the fourth camp at 7,800 meters. This is the last point before the summit assault. In addition to organized climbing teams, there were also Sherpa and HAP assistants. Sherpas are a people from Nepal who accompany ascents on Everest. But due to a shortage of local Pakistani guides, HAPs, they are increasingly working on Chogori as well. That time, the Sherpas came with an unexpected companion, one of Spain's best climbers, the 46-year-old Basque Alberto Zerain. He was a soloist and didn't have the resources that expeditions had, so he agreed to help the Sherpas in exchange for a spot for his tent in the camp. It seemed Alberto needed nothing but the mountains, a tent, and a phone to call his wife. Before the ascent, the teams agreed to act together to make everything go as quickly and safely as possible. But nothing went according to plan. Late in the evening of July 31st, the guides began installing fixed ropes. They were supposed to help the climbers on the ascent and serve as safety. While everyone prepared for the assault, Zerain joined the Sherpas and HAPs, helping to set anchors. But unexpectedly, the unofficial leader of the HAPs, Shaheen Beg, showed symptoms of altitude sickness. He was forced to descend immediately to the camp. This was a surprise. Beg was considered the most experienced among the guides. With his departure, chaos began. The installation finished an hour and a half late. It seemed like a minor delay, but as events showed, even small things could become fatal. A few hours later, it turned out that no one had checked the quality of the installed ropes. On August 1st at 3 a.m., the climbers began the ascent. Almost immediately, they noticed that part of the safety ropes was fixed too early, before the real difficulties. Moreover, some cables were installed in places where they weren't needed at all. But the worst part was that the ropes ended right above the bottleneck in the most dangerous zone, where they were needed the most. Alberto Zerain joined the group when they had already decided to reinstall the ropes themselves. But he made a fateful decision to continue the ascent without safety. No one could have predicted then that this would be his fatal mistake. The incident with the ropes further delayed the ascent. At 8 a.m., the climbers finally began passing the bottleneck. And then the first accident happened. One of the Serbian climbers, for unknown reasons, unclipped from the safety. He probably wanted to pass the Norwegian Cecilie Skog, but lost his balance, hit her, and fell down. Skog held on to the rope, while the man flew more than 100 meters down the couloir. Several climbers in the fourth camp saw the fall and sent a rescue group. They hoped the person was still alive. 2 members of the Serbian team and HAP Shaheen Beg also began descending to the body. But all they could do was confirm the death. They decided to lower the body to the base camp. 4 men tied themselves with a common rope, to which they attached the body of the deceased. They agreed that if someone started falling, the others would unclip to avoid pulling everyone down. And then something strange happened. From the beginning, it was noticeable that something was wrong with Beg. He was delirious, staggering. Possibly, altitude sickness had begun. At some point, he collided with one of the climbers and started falling. Despite logic and their agreement, he held on to the rope too long, and when he finally unclipped, to everyone's horror, he didn't even try to hold on to the slope. He simply tumbled into the abyss headfirst. After that, the remaining ones wrapped their comrade's body in a flag and left it on the mountain. Due to the tragedy, 4 more abandoned the ascent and descended. The rest continued the climb. Because of numerous delays, the climbers reached the summit much later than planned. The ascent was supposed to end by 5 p.m., so that everyone could return to camp before dark. But temperatures plummet at sunset, and darkness makes movement nearly impossible. That day, the last climbers reached the summit only by 8 p.m. In total, 18 people conquered the summit of Chogori that day. By that time, Alberto Zerain was already in the base camp. He passed the bottleneck without incident, summit at 3 p.m., and went to rest. His satellite phone battery died, and he didn't know that he had slept through the most horrific disaster in the history of K2 ascents. Meanwhile, his wife, Patricia, heard about the tragedy in the news. She tried to call unsuccessfully. All that was left was to wait, hoping her husband was alive. But not all wives were as lucky as Patricia that day. Cecilie Skog, an experienced climber from Norway, summit Chogori 2 hours after Alberto Zerain. Only 100 meters remained to the summit when her husband, Rolf Bay, stopped. He felt tired. Possibly altitude sickness was starting, and he decided not to go further. Cecily and Rolf had married just a year ago. She was the first woman in the world to have been to both poles and summit the highest points of all continents. He was a polar explorer and climber who always supported his wife. Rolf even brought a bright inflatable sofa to the K2 camp so they could watch movies together in the tent in the evenings. They didn't know it would be their last movie together. When Cecily returned to her husband, darkness had already fallen over K2. The Norwegian team began the descent. All participants were okay. They had almost passed the traverse leading to the bottleneck when a serac collapsed from above. A gigantic ice block cut all the safety ropes. The climbers were left without any protection. But for Cecily, none of this mattered anymore. The serac killed her husband right before her eyes. After the ice fall, descending through the bottleneck became even more dangerous. The climbers had counted on fixed ropes, but they had no extra cables, no tents, no sleeping bags, no stoves to melt water. And at such altitude, the body needs up to 6 liters of fluid a day, or the blood starts to thicken. But they had nothing. When night fell, the temperature at the summit dropped sharply to -40. Exhausted, dehydrated, in the dark and in the death zone, the climbers were on the brink of panic. Some decided to wait for dawn. Others went all in and began descending alone without safety. Free solo. Now each was responsible only for themselves. No common harnesses, no ropes, just their own strength. Cecily managed to pull herself together and began the descent with her teammate. They reached the 4th camp at night. Several other ascent participants also descended. Sherpas Tsering Boat and Pemba Jiljan helped a climber from the South Korean team return to camp. But that night, the bottleneck confirmed its status as Chogori's most deadly zone. 2 athletes tried to pass the icy passage. About halfway through the traverse, a Danish climber overtook another expedition participant. The latter had run out of oxygen and had no strength left to go. The Dane continued descending and had already reached the base of the couloir when a human body flew past him into the abyss. Thus, K2 claimed another life. Meanwhile, the widowed Cecily Skog continued descending the cursed mountain. In the morning, she called the parents of the deceased Rolf. The woman told them about his death and heard in response, "Now we have only you left. Please, descend alive." Cecily promised she would, because Rolf's voice was helping her. She heard it in the whisper of the mountains. She continued her path to the base of Chogori, unaware that at that very moment, chaos was unfolding up above, and it would become the cause of the most horrific disaster in the history of K2 ascents. The night over Chogori passed, but with dawn came not relief and order, but a new spiral of horror. Among those who survived the night above the bottleneck were the Italian Marco Confortola and the Irishman Gerard MacDonald. They began surveying the surroundings, preparing for descent. The first thing they saw was 3 Korean climbers hanging upside down, tangled in ropes. Confortola and MacDonald hurried to them to try to help. At the same time, a rescue group set out from the 4th camp. The same Sherpa boats who had saved the South Korean climber the day before. Now they were going to search for the rest of her team and their relative Jumik boat. From this moment, events began unfolding rapidly and confusingly. Subsequently, witness testimonies contradicted each other, and to this day, there is no complete picture of what happened. Only one thing is known: the number of deaths. Confortola and MacDonald spent hours trying to free the Koreans. When the Sherpa boats arrived, the Italian was on the verge of exhaustion and began descending. Almost immediately after that, an avalanche came down above the bottleneck. Confortola managed to survive, but according to him, he saw the Irishman's gear in the snow. Later, the Sherpas found the exhausted Confortola at the base of the couloir. They radioed for help and went to search for their relative. On the way, they met 2 Koreans whom they managed to free from the ropes. So the Irishman had saved them after all, but whether he himself survived was unknown. Finally, Pong boat reported on the radio that he had found Jumik. They began descending, but got caught in a new avalanche that caused a serac collapse. Ice blocks crashed down on Paong, his just-rescued relative, and 3 Koreans, sweeping all 5 off their feet. Sailing boat survived. He was ascending more slowly and hadn't reached the top of the couloir yet. Confortola also stayed alive. The next day, he was evacuated from the camp by helicopter along with several other climbers. Others descended on their own. Among them was Cece Lyskog. Later it became known that the Irishman Gerard MacDonell, who saved the Koreans, had died. The circumstances and exact time of his death remain unknown to this day. For the young American Nicholas Rice, his first ascent of Chogori went wrong from the start. Still at night, he accidentally knocked over a pot of water. It spilled right onto his socks. At such altitude, wet clothing means one thing: almost guaranteed frostbite. Because of this absurd situation, Rice missed the group start of the ascent. He wanted to climb K2 with his new friend, the Frenchman Hugues Diabarid. They had become friends during the long weeks waiting for good weather. For Hugues, this was already his 3rd attempt to conquer the savage mountain. Rice genuinely admired him, and Diabarid treated the American almost paternally. When Nicholas finally left the camp that fateful morning, he saw a line of climbers ascending to the summit. His feet were starting to freeze. After the first 2 deaths, he doubted whether to continue. Soon, Rice made a decision. He began packing his things. His season on K2 was over, but he couldn't stop thinking about Hugues. The Frenchman stubbornly moved upward. He had decided in advance that this would be his last ascent. After the Serac fall, Rice knew nothing about his friend's fate. By his calculations, Hugues should already have been at the summit. The American spent hours looking at the mountain's slope through a telescope from the 4th camp, hoping for at least a hint, a silhouette, a trace. But for a long time, no information. Later, it became known that Hugues Diabarid died around 1 a.m. Apparently, his death was witnessed by that same Danish climber who overtook him at the Bottleneck. Hugues's companion, a woman named Karim, also died. The causes of their deaths remained a mystery. Upon learning of the Frenchman's death, Rice fulfilled his friend's last wish. The day before, they had exchanged phone numbers of their closest relatives in case something happened. Rice knew that Hugues's youngest daughter was about to get married. Diabarid had promised to walk her down the aisle and added that this ascent was his last. The American contacted Hugues's family and reported. The last promise was not fulfilled. When information about the death of 11 climbers on Chogori reached the world press, the reaction was strange. Many said the tragedy happened for banal reasons and that it could have been avoided entirely. Experienced climbers began openly criticizing the approach to climbing K2. They claimed the ascent had turned into something like an all-inclusive booking, and these reproaches were not unfounded. Even Chogori, despite its reputation as a wild and unpredictable giant, was rapidly approaching the status of a commercial route, just like Everest, which had long become touristy, with long queues at the summit. In July 2022, shocking photos were taken. They show the summit of Chogori. Right in the center of the deadly dangerous bottleneck stand dozens of climbers in a tight line, as if queuing for coffee. That day, 145 people summit. And this when, over the entire history of ascents, the total number of successful climbs was just over 700. But those who sell spots to the summit, and those who pay for them, forget one thing. The mountain won't become gentler, it won't become safer, it doesn't forgive weakness and overconfidence. And the more such queues for a dream there are, the more lives it will take. What do you think? Is there a danger that K2 will finally turn into a commercial mountain like Everest? Write in the comments.